Hi, welcome to English 101. I know a lot of you are probably coming out of high school for a really long time, and so you're kind of like, oh, writing, I don't like writing. But the unfortunate thing is that most of college is writing, so even though it may not be your favorite subject, just remember that it's something that you will use in every class. So if you can kind of think, it's not about this class, but it's about learning something that will give you a skill for other classes, even the ones you really enjoy, then maybe you can kind of grasp hold of this and be excited about it. So to get us started, what we need to kind of understand is academic writing. What is academic writing? It's not the same as a lot of stuff that you might have done in elementary school and high school. It's really formulaic. It's kind of boring in a way, but it is definitely something that is going to help you be successful. And so let me just talk about that for a second. The first part of academic writing is it needs to be formal. It needs to have a formal tone to it that isn't like talking to your best friend. If I was in a live classroom with you, I actually would say to you, tell me that you want me to come to a party as your best friend. How do you invite your best friend to a party? And most people are like, hey dude, come to my party, you know, and then I'll say, okay, now invite your mom or your dad to a party. And it gets more like, hey mom, would you be willing to come to my party this weekend? And then I say, okay, now invite your employer. And then all of a sudden it's like, dear sir, would you come to the party that I am having this weekend? Well, notice the formalness of the tone completely changes with where we are in a relationship with people. Now, your professor, I need you to think of them as the same level as your boss, or even higher, because believe it or not, your professor is the way that you're going to get that better job so that maybe someday you are the boss. So we need to actually use an intellectual, formal tone that is not, doesn't have any cliches or slang in it. And so that's the main part of it, is I want you to kind of get a grasp hold of formal tone. The next thing is you gotta lose first and second pronouns unless you are told otherwise. First pronouns are like I, me, it's all about me. I'm included in everything. I think this, I think that. So you wanna get rid of those unless it's a personal journal or something where a professor actually says you can write in first person. Now, second person is you and your. These are never acceptable. Even in a personalized journal, you never say you or your. The reason is it's actually finger pointing and assuming something of your reader. It's telling your professor something about them when you may not even know anything about them. So be sure never to use you and your, except for maybe in a personalized email, but in any academic writing, any paper that you might do at this college, get rid of those. Never, never, never use them. All right. The third part of this is professional appearance. There are standards that you probably learned way back in PD 340 that basically show you how to set up an APA formatted paper. And it's very important that you stick to these standards. I cannot express this more. Especially in this class, you will get graded pretty harshly if you do not follow them. So be sure to always have a cover sheet. Have a running header with your name and the page number. Always have a reference page that is formatted in APA formatting. Double space, 12-point font, black ink only, Courier, Arial, or what's the other one? Or Times New Roman. So you basically pick one of those three, generic fonts that are easy to read, that are not fancy, nothing like, comic or anything crazy like that. Always stick to the standard fonts. And so formatting, it's the same way across the board. This is academia way of doing things, so make sure you do that. All right, the next one is avoid repetition. A lot of times we're trying to get to word count, so we will say the same thing over and over and over, when in reality that is not the way to do it. I always tell my students, if you're trying to get to word count, you need to understand that a professor gives you word count not to see if you can write 500 words, but to see if you can write 500 words well. So it's not about getting to you can get still a bad grade even if you get to the 500 words if you just ramble on and say the same thing over and over and over. So watch out for repetition. Make sure your ideas are all separated and that they're actually concrete and they have value and intellectual stimulus built into them so that you actually understand at the end of the day that you have taken the time to write that paper and you're not just regurgitating information. So anyways, watch the repetition. And then I wanted to talk for a second about the introduction. Introductions are very important because they actually are that thing that pulls me into your paper and makes me want to read it. So there are 5 parts to an introduction. The first one is a hook. You ever go on to MSN or Google or any of those places where they have possibly some kind of article? And it might say something, like Miley Cyrus is bald or something crazy like that, right? Well, you click on those things and you want to read the article that is attached to it. Why in the world do you care about, a cat stuck in a tree? You don't. It's just that they give you some interesting, thing that makes you want to click on it and find out more. So that's what a hook is. That is your first sentence of your paper. It needs to be interesting. It could be an anecdote, a statistic, a quote, something just really shocking. Those are the things you want to use to get us into your paper. That's the click point, the point where you would click your mouse to read more about it. Then you have 3 sentences minimum that kind of give us a background on where your paper is going to go. You can utilize your body paragraph topic sentences in your introduction if you would like to do it that way. And then lastly, always lastly, every time I look at a paper, it's the first thing I look at is that final sentence in your introduction is your thesis statement. Your thesis, which we'll learn about more in week 2, is that sentence that tells me everything that's in your paper. And it must be strong, it needs to be arguable, it needs to be able to stand alone, and that sentence is everything goes around that sentence. So make sure it's always the last sentence of your introduction. Now notice, there should be a minimum of 5 sentences in an introduction. A 2-sentence introduction is not long enough. It doesn't give me enough time to jump into the paper. So minimally, there's always 5 sentences in an introduction. And lastly, I want to talk about how to get started. How do I get started? Now that we're in this writing class, what do I need to do? Well, first, determine your audience. The age of somebody is going to affect the kind of language you need to use. How simple does it need to be? Can it be more complex? Believe it or not, if you're writing about technology, depending on the age, believe it or not, there are teenagers or even middle schoolers that probably know more about technology than somebody who's maybe in their 70s. So the language changes according to what they, their age and what they know. It can also be affected by gender. Your audience, if it's all female, you might address it in one way that's maybe more emotional, where if you hit a male audience, you might be more logical. If you have a blended audience, you obviously need to include both emotion and logic into your piece so that it fits both of them. Social and religious and political, obviously those are going to affect how you address something. If you are going towards something political or religious that is contrary to what you're writing, then it affects how you come into the paper. You can't just jump in and tell them they're wrong. You have to kind of give them statistics and facts and stuff to back up where you're going so that they will listen to you. You also have to be empathetic to the other side. If you and I do not believe about the same thing, then I need to at least understand your point of view, whether I agree with it or not. So, for instance, this is a good example. If you're writing about abortion, a common topic, you might, if you believe in pro-life, and you're going to talk to somebody who's pro-choice, you have to at least understand why somebody would have an abortion. You may not agree with it, but you have to at least understand the reasoning behind it to really be able to speak into somebody's life. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, making sure you understand. And then lastly, education, how intellectual someone is or their background will determine the language that you might use. If there's somebody who's a novice, then obviously that's different than if somebody is an expert. One of them you have to describe in everything, whereas the other one you could probably hit the big words and they would know what you were talking about. And then determine your purpose. Why are you even writing this paper? Which we'll get into more later on, but is it a cause and effect paper? Is it, an argumentative paper? Is it just explaining or showing me something? Whatever your purpose is, you want to stick with that and really develop your paper according to that. All right, well, that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be talking more about topic and thesis statements. I look forward to taking this journey with you. Have a great week. God bless.